He divorced me at the age of 50 and moved in with his new wife. He was arguing about my age, not interesting enough. After 25 years, he needed someone who was more energetic. After that, he divorced me, married his mistress, and moved her into the house I paid for. They anticipated that I would leave in silence. I would simply retreat into the shadows. However, they forgot one detail. The house was never solely his. I still have the deed today. To begin, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. Please, if you are comfortable doing so, let me know what time and where you are listening. Let me fill you in on the details. James Carter told me he wanted a divorce when I was 50 years old. Previously, I had packed his lunches, assisted Liam Parker with his homework, and balanced our bills at the kitchen table where we sat. He couldn't even meet my gaze. He simply spoke to Emma Wilson, staring at the steam coming from his coffee. I feel as if we've grown apart, used up, as if I were a worn-out coat he no longer wanted to wear. The couple had been married for 27 years. James Carter's hours were unpredictable, and someone needed to be home when Liam Parker was born, so I resigned as a bank promotee. House rules were under my control. The books were balanced, and I cooked and cleaned. I selflessly cared for his ailing mother for nearly 2 years. I didn't want absolute power, a sense of decency, a measure of devotion. Rather, I received the divorce paperwork in complete silence by Wednesday following a Tuesday. He vacated the premises by the end of the month. He claimed to require personal space. I discovered much later that he had not checked into a hotel or apartment. They lived together. Hello, Sophie Evans. He introduced me to the woman in the accounting department 2 years ago. Her age was 34, exactly the same age as our son. James Carter lacked the basic decency to remain silent about it. They were smiling on beaches, posting vacation photos, and drinking wine in Napa in weeks. At the same time, I sat alone on the furniture I'd chosen, staring at the empty chairs in the house I'd built from nothing. Unfortunately, Liam Parker made an attempt to appear impartial. He had reached adulthood, but he felt trapped in his mid-20s. He told me he wished he could remain neutral. I told him that it was unnecessary. I'm already aware of everyone's positions. Later, a letter arrived in my mailbox early one morning, not on James Carter's part, sent by Sophie Evans. The invitation looked like it belonged on pink stationery. Continue reading. Emma Wilson, I need you to schedule a time to come get the rest of your belongings. While James Carter and I are settling in, we'd like to start this new chapter peacefully. I prefer mornings. Best regards, Sophie Evans Foster. Hello, Sophie Evans. Take care of. She even remembered my name. They came into my home, had the audacity to interrupt me. I returned to that table and spent a long time looking at the letter. Unbeknownst to me, my tea had become cold. I was shaking uncontrollably, apart from melancholy, because of anger. I was the owner of that house. I discovered it, but we both purchased it. The person who worked 2 shifts at the bank in order to make the initial deposit. Somehow, my name remained on the mortgage. No, James Carter didn't refinance. He complained that it was an unnecessary hassle. That was going to be a major pain. I called Rachel Brooks, my longest-standing friend. She was the most familiar with me having practiced law for nearly 2 decades. She fell silent after I finished explaining the details. The question was then asked, "Is your name still on the deed?" Which I confirmed. Nothing ever changes. Has he ever bought your share from you? No. You are still the rightful owner of half of that house, she gently reminded Emma Wilson. I squinted. I do not understand, so there is no need to make any requests. One option is to start a partitioning action. Sales can be coerced. They may also be compelled to pay you. I remained silent at first. Will they need to leave? I inquired further. Rachel Brooks assured me that if they are unable to financially support you, they will buy you out. 2 days later, Greg called me sounding proud and concerned but insincere. Is it true, Elaine, that you retained legal counsel? Yes. Why? Avoid making things more complicated than they need to be. It was already difficult because of you, I explained. It's just a small favor I'm returning. For some reason, he persisted in trying to guilt me into leaving by claiming that I was bitter and that Bridget disliked my company. My voice stayed low. My only previous comment was that she shouldn't be living in a house with my name on the deed. The call ended. However, that was not the end. Bridget sent me another email, but this time she was extremely combative. I should just let the younger people have fun, she said, adding that I was embarrassing myself. She claimed I was clinging to a dead marriage, while Greg deserved a fresh start. I stayed silent. Instead, I decided to escalate the situation and called Monica again. We have officially submitted the paperwork to the court. The petition was perfect, impenetrable, and unshakable. It's not like I was raucous. The action was on my part. Greg got caught off guard. She didn't either. Monica told me not to speak up. I will present my case to the legal system. It took a deep breath for me to come to a halt as I approached the driveway that had previously been mine and saw Bridget's white BMW parked there. I had no intention of causing a disturbance. I went there to gather my final possessions as advised in her little pink letter. I did not even knock. I turned in my key. Greg seems to have forgotten I still had it because he was too lazy to change the locks. When I entered my own living room, I pried the door open. Despite its strange appearance, the couch remained unchanged. The walls had been painted a light beige that resembled a hotel lobby. My family photos were gone, replaced by framed quotes like "good vibes only" and "love wins." It looked like Pinterest threw up all over my memories. I stepped into the kitchen. She'd rearranged everything. My spice rack was gone. The mason jar that once held my tea bags now held organic lollipops. I could feel something tightening in my chest. Not sadness, but a fire building in my gut. Bridget came downstairs in one of Greg's old t-shirts. She stopped cold when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to get my things," I said, holding up the email she sent me. "You're supposed to schedule a time," she snapped. "We have rules now, boundaries." I walked past her calmly and slowly. "Well, sweetheart, as long as my name's still on this house, I'll come and go as I please." Her face flushed. "Greg will hear about this." "Good," I said. "He should have been the one to greet me." I packed quietly, a few boxes, some books, a necklace from my mother. I didn't need to take much. I'd already decided I'd never live in this house again. "James Carter will hear about this." "Good," I said. "He should have been the one to greet me." I packed quietly, a few boxes, some books, a necklace from my mother. I didn't need to take much. I'd already decided I'd never live in this house again, not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of thinking they pushed me out. Sophie Evans followed me like a shadow, arms crossed, eyes rolling. She whispered under her breath, "Pathetic." I stopped cold. "Excuse me?" She straightened her back like she was about to square up. "You couldn't hold on to your husband, so now you're playing petty games. You're jealous because he wanted someone better." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just said, "Better doesn't last. And I'm not playing games. I'm just claiming what's mine." Then I left. That night, Rachel Brooks called to say the paperwork had gone through. The court had accepted the partition action. James Carter and Sophie Evans were officially notified the next morning. "Do you want to deliver it yourself?" she asked. "No," I said. "Let the system slap them." The next day, James Carter called me 4 times. I didn't pick up. He left one voicemail. Emma Wilson, what are you doing? This is insane. You're forcing us to sell the house after everything I've done for you. I laughed out loud. Everything he'd done for me, I was the one who sacrificed promotions, stayed through layoffs, cooked every meal, and paid half the bills. I didn't walk out. He did. He tried calling again the next day, so I ignored him. On the third day, I picked up. Emma Wilson, we need to talk. So talk. Why are you doing this? You mean forcing a sale of a house I still legally own? You know we can't afford to buy you out right now. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you moved her in. His tone changed soft like the man I once knew. Emma Wilson, you don't need this kind of stress. No, I said, you don't, but you brought it on yourself. Then I hung up. 2 days later, Sophie Evans called, not texted, called. He was crying. You're ruining us, she sniffled. You're humiliating us. Please, Emma Wilson, be a woman about this. I paused. Being a woman means knowing your worth, and I'm done shrinking for either of you. Then I blocked her. From that point forward, I didn't say a word. I let Rachel Brooks do the talking and the paperwork do the cutting. James Carter and Sophie Evans hired a lawyer and tried to challenge the partition. It didn't work. The judge looked at the deed and the mortgage and said the magic words. Ms. Foster remains a legal co-owner. Unless the parties agree to a private buyout, the property must be sold. Rachel Brooks smiled at me in court. I didn't smile back. I was still watching, still waiting. Revenge wasn't complete yet. They still had keys. They still had a kitchen. They still had heat. But no, they also had a deadline. 60 days to either buy me out or get out. And I already knew they couldn't do either. Sophie Evans wasn't working. James Carter's salary hadn't changed. And now they had legal fees on top of mortgage payments. I walked past the house one morning and saw a for sale by owner sign on the lawn. They were trying to handle it themselves, avoid agent fees, and maybe rush a sale. But the market was tough. And karma doesn't play favorites. I sat down at my kitchen table, my new one, in my small but peaceful rental and lit a candle. Not for them, for me. Because this wasn't about destruction, it was about restoration. And they were about to find out what it feels like to be erased from something you thought you owned. Sophie Evans started posting vague quotes on Facebook. Some women don't know when to let go. Bitterness will rot your soul. The comments were passive-aggressive, full of staged selfies and filtered tears. But I wasn't looking for pity. I wasn't interested in what she called healing energy. This wasn't spiritual warfare. This was legal. By week 3, the for sale sign was gone from the yard, replaced with a clean, professionally printed, now listed placard. I recognized the name of the agent. Rachel Brooks had made a few calls. We weren't letting them go cheap. They were going to sell the house. It had to be at fair market value. No shady under-the-table transfer, no backdoor deal to Sophie Evans's cousin or James Carter's golfing buddy. This was a clean split, which meant they had to work with us. James Carter texted me again. This time it wasn't angry. We need to talk about the staging. I didn't respond. He tried again. Can you please not remove everything? Sophie Evans is feeling really exposed right now. I almost replied. She wasn't feeling exposed when she wore my husband's t-shirt and told me I was pathetic. But I took a breath and passed it to Rachel Brooks. She handled everything with the realtor. I didn't need to step foot in that house again. And that was by design. Let them feel the walls closing in. Let them walk past the bedroom I slept in for 27 years and wonder what else they didn't know. By the time the showing started, they were already unraveling. Sophie Evans called the listing agent in tears, asking if she could delay visits until they found a new place. The agent politely reminded her this was a court-ordered sale, not a choice, a requirement. They had to keep the place spotless, ready for strangers to come in and judge their countertops. I heard through Liam Parker that James Carter was sleeping on the couch some nights and that he and Sophie Evans were fighting constantly. That he told her, this is what happens when you poke a bear. I wasn't a bear. I was the deed. They didn't just underestimate me. They misunderstood me entirely. I wasn't the kind of woman to scream or throw things. I was the kind of woman who signed documents with a steady hand and waited for the storm I planted to bloom. At week 5, an offer came in. Full asking price. Kish. No contingencies. The buyer was a young Black couple expecting their first child. They fell in love with the house immediately. Rachel Brooks told me before she told anyone else. They wanted fast 2-week close. I said, perfect. James Carter called me 3 times that day. I didn't answer. I was at my nail appointment getting a shade called Brick Dust. I liked them. Later that evening, I checked my voicemail. First message, Emma Wilson, come on, this is bigger than just us. You don't want to do this. Second message, you're really going to let strangers walk into our home and erase everything? Third message, I know we ended badly, but this is vindictive. You're not leaving us with anything. It was the first time he said it out loud, as if they were a unit now, as if his betrayal had matured into something legitimate. I suppose that was his way of saying Sophie Evans was in this with him for better or worse. Unfortunately for them, worse was what I had left. The day of the final walkthrough, James Carter had to be out of the house for 4 hours. I know this because Rachel Brooks told me they requested a brief extension to clean up. The buyers had already scheduled movers. There was no more time left. When they left that house, they weren't owners. They were trespassers with keys that no longer worked. Me, I was $370,000 richer. James Carter finally broke his silence in person. He showed up at my new place, a quiet little 2-bedroom unit with a garden view, and knocked like he still had the right. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked smaller, not thinner, just shrunken, like gravity had finally caught up with his lies. I came to ask you something, he said. I crossed my arms. Can you help us with the deposit on our new place? We're short. I stared at him. Excuse me? He raised his hands. I know how it sounds, but we had no idea you'd go this far. You thought I'd stay quiet, I finished for him. He nodded. You've never been the spiteful type. I'm not spiteful, I said. I'm strategic. There's a difference. He shifted awkward in his stance. Sophie Evans staying with her sister. I'm at a hotel in River Park. I didn't think it would end like this. You ended it, I reminded him. You made your choices. You moved her into my house before the ink on our divorce was dry. He had the nerve to look hurt. We were in love. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't lie. And love damn sure doesn't send me a letter on pink paper asking me to schedule pickups like I was some stranger. His eyes dropped to the floor. I leaned against the doorframe. You didn't just replace me, James Carter. You erased me. So I did the same. He stood there for a second, then nodded slowly. No argument, no outburst, just quiet understanding, the kind of silence that follows true defeat. When he left, I didn't close the door right away. I watched him walk away. I thought about the years I spent shrinking so he could feel tall. I thought about every time I bit my tongue so he could say face. I thought about the nights I cried in that house while he was working late. And I smiled, because sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens or applause. Sometimes it comes with a signature on a dotted line and the sound of a man realizing he bet everything on someone who didn't even read the fine print. Let them figure out where to go next, because I already knew where I was headed. A week after the sale closed, the house I helped build became someone else's fresh start. I didn't cry. I didn't even drive by. Rachel Brooks offered to meet me for lunch to celebrate, and we did. Over catfish and collard greens, she toasted me with sweet tea and said, "You did what most people only dream of doing. You made them feel what they made you feel. Powerless." I nodded, but inside it wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoration, peace, closure, and if I'm being honest, maybe just a little bit of vengeance too. James Carter and Sophie Evans had officially vacated the property 2 days before closing. The real estate agent told Rachel Brooks they left it clean but cold like a hotel room after checkout. I could picture it. Sophie Evans is trying to fluff pillows while cursing under her breath. James Carter is probably stomping through each room, grumbling about the lawyer's paperwork and me. They thought I was petty, but I wasn't the one who crossed the line first. They did that when they moved her into my home like I had never existed. Liam Parker called me the next evening. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "Dad's not doing great." I stayed silent. "He's staying with a friend for now. He said something about his credit being shot," said Sophie Evans, blaming him for everything. "She should," I said plainly. "He let her play queen in a castle that wasn't his." Liam Parker sighed. "I don't want to take sides." "You already did," I said gently, "when you stayed quiet while they treated me like a ghost." He didn't respond to that, just whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't need him to grovel. I just needed him to understand the depth of what had happened, not just to me, but to the idea of family, loyalty, respect. Later that week, I got an email from Sophie Evans. It started with the usual faux politeness. "Emma Wilson, I know we've had our differences." She went on to say they were looking for a new place but having a hard time. She asked if I'd be willing to loan them part of the money from the house sale to help them get back on their feet. She even had the gall to write, "After all, it's not like you need it as much as we do." I stared at the screen for a long time, blinking slowly. Then I hit delete. No reply, no engagement, no reaction. That silence would be louder than anything I could say. Rachel Brooks told me they'd likely end up in a rental, a downgrade, which is poetic, she added, because they treated you like a downgrade. I spent the next few weeks in something close to peace. I picked up a part-time job at the library, something to keep my mind active. The work was quiet, respectful, and surrounded by stories which felt fitting. I had my own small place now, nothing fancy, but it was mine, fully mine. No shared deed, no waiting on approval, no second toothbrush in the bathroom, just space, solitude, and healing. One afternoon while shelving books, a woman in her 40s approached me. She recognized me from church years ago. She said, "Emma Wilson, I heard what happened. I just want to say you handled that with grace." I thanked her, but she leaned in and whispered, "And power." That part stayed with me. Power. I never thought of myself that way before, but I suppose it takes a certain kind of strength to lose everything and build something better in its place, quietly, intentionally, without begging for permission or validation. A few days later, I saw James Carter again, not by choice. I was picking up groceries when I noticed a man sitting on the bench outside the pharmacy. He looked tired, hair unkempt, shirt wrinkled. It took me a second to realize it was him. He saw me and stood quickly. "Emma Wilson, hey." I nodded but didn't stop walking. He followed me to my car. "I'm not trying to fight," he said. "I just wanted to talk." I paused. "Talk about what James Carter." He shifted on his feet. I didn't think you had it in you." I raised my brow. "The court stuff, the house, everything." I leaned against my car door, arms crossed. "You thought I was too weak to fight back." He rubbed his face. No, I thought you'd be too tired. That hit me deeper than I expected, because he was right about one thing. I had been tired. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of being the background to someone else's spotlight. But then I realized, tired isn't the same as done. Well, I said softly, I guess you miscalculated. He chuckled bitterly and sadly. Sophie Evans left. I blinked. Already? She said I embarrassed her, that she gave up everything for a man who couldn't even keep a roof over her head. And she's wrong? I asked. He didn't answer. I stared at him for a moment, then opened my car door. Good luck, James Carter. He reached out, like he wanted to say more, but I was already sliding into the driver's seat. I didn't owe him another conversation. Not anymore. When I got home that evening, I opened the folder Rachel Brooks had given me weeks ago. It had all the paperwork from the sale, the deed transfer, the final payout statement, and something extra. A handwritten note from Rachel Brooks that said, "You didn't just cash out. You cashed in on your piece." I folded the note and tucked it into my drawer, and then I made myself a glass of wine, lit a candle, and turned on the radio. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something, or mourning something, or holding on to something. I was just living, and the silence around me wasn't loneliness anymore. It was freedom. About 2 months after I saw James Carter outside that pharmacy, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting right away, slanted, rushed, and looped. Just like the way Sophie Evans signed her name on the pink stationery she used to send me that ridiculous message months ago, the one telling me to schedule a pickup. I opened the envelope with steady hands, already knowing it wouldn't be an apology, and I was right. Sophie Evans wasn't the apologizing type. It was a guilt trip on paper, a whimper dressed up in passive aggression. One of those "you win, but look what you've done" letters. She said I'd ruined 2 lives and shattered a future. Like I hadn't simply taken back what was already mine. Near the bottom, she scribbled, "Hope it was worth it." I folded the letter neatly and slid it under the nearest coaster on my dining table. I didn't tear it up. I didn't burn it. I didn't even curse under my breath. Because it was worth it. Every second of silence, every signature on every page, every tear I never let them see. Later that week, Liam Parker invited me to dinner. He'd been trying to reconnect more lately. I could tell the fog had lifted for him. Maybe he was starting to see James Carter and Sophie Evans without the polish. I didn't hold his silence against him anymore. Not because it didn't hurt, but because holding it would only weigh me down longer. We met at a small restaurant near the marina. Nothing fancy, but cozy enough that it felt like home. He looked like the boy I used to read bedtime stories to, only now with a grown man's face and guilt in his eyes. After we ordered, he fidgeted with the edge of his napkin. "I want to say thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not letting him get away with it." I stared at him for a second, not because I was surprised, but because it felt so long overdue. "I didn't know how to stop him," he admitted. "But you did. You didn't just lose a husband. You lost your dignity in that marriage. And then you turned around and took it back, on your terms." I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just took a deep breath and said I didn't do it to punish him, baby. I did it so I could breathe again, so the next woman like me doesn't feel like she has to disappear just because someone said she's not enough. He reached across the table and held my hand. "I've got a guest room," he said. "You can come stay with me anytime. We'll find you a new house, something better, something that's yours and only yours." I smiled, but I shook my head. "I already have something better," I said. "Peace." A week later, I found myself walking into a women's seminar at the community center. Rachel Brooks had signed me up as a speaker without asking. Typical Rachel Brooks. Just talk about your story, she said. You'd be surprised how many women need to hear it. I didn't want to at first. I wasn't some polished keynote speaker. I was just a woman who'd survived humiliation and betrayal. But when I looked around that room at the tired eyes, the tightly folded arms, the weary smiles, I saw myself. Not the polished version, not the woman sitting there with clean paperwork and peace. I saw the Emma Wilson who used to cry into her pillow when no one was watching. The Emma Wilson who used to think staying silent was the same thing as staying strong. So I stood up and I told them everything. Not just about James Carter or Sophie Evans or the lawsuit. I told them about the nights I spent eating dinner alone in the house I paid for. About the way people looked at me like I was the ex-wife who couldn't move on. About the way silence can become its own prison when no one listens anymore. And then I told them how I got free. Not through rage, not through begging, not through violence or drama, but through knowing the power of timing, the strength of strategy, and the value of a signature on the right piece of paper. When I finished, one woman hugged me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "You reminded me that it's not too late. It's never too late." That night I went home and pulled out a fresh journal, not the one I'd used to write heartbreak letters to myself years ago, a brand new one, untouched. And on the first page I wrote, "This is not a second chapter. This is a whole new book." The next morning, Rachel Brooks called with an update. The couple who bought my old home had fully moved in. They were a young Black couple, expecting their first child in the spring. They painted the back office into a nursery and turned my old garden into a vegetable patch. They said it finally feels like a home, she told me. That made me smile for the first time in days. That house deserved love. It deserved laughter again. It deserved warmth that wasn't forced. As for James Carter, last I heard, he was renting a condo in a strip mall complex, rooming with some guy who charged him for using the washer and dryer. Sophie Evans, she ghosted on social media. Some say she moved back to Ohio. Others say she works part-time retail and tells people she used to live in a big house. I don't really care. Because the day they decided I was expendable, when they moved her into my home and treated me like a footnote, they handed me the match. All I did was strike it. Now I sit in a kitchen that's entirely mine. There's no echo of anyone else's footsteps. Just me, my mug of tea, and the hum of a life I built from the ashes. The mug I'm holding says unbothered and paid. It was a gift from Rachel Brooks, and it makes me laugh every time I sip from it. I don't think about what I lost anymore. I think about what I reclaimed. My dignity, my voice, my damn name. And the best part, I did it all without ever raising my voice. Because silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's a warning, and sometimes it's the beginning of war. Some people think the story ends once you've won, once you've served the papers, closed the sale, and watched the people who disrespected you pack boxes and vanish. They think that's the finish line, revenge complete, peace restored, curtain closed. But life keeps going. And sometimes the most powerful part of your story begins after everyone assumes you faded. That was me. After James Carter and Sophie Evans disappeared from my life. One to a rental complex with thin walls, the other to obscurity in a town that didn't know her name. I didn't throw a party. I didn't strut around like a queen. I simply exhaled. It was the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding until your lungs ache from relief. I took that money from the house sale, over $370,000 after fees and taxes. And I didn't splurge. I didn't buy a sports car or fly to Bali. I sat down with Rachel Brooks and did what every woman who's been underestimated should do. I made a plan. We met with a financial planner, A Black woman who walked in with natural curls, pearl earrings, and eyes sharper than a hawk's. She looked over my documents, asked the right questions, and said, "Let's make sure this money outlives the betrayal." I smiled. That's exactly what I wanted. I invested half. I bought a small but modern condo in my name only. No co-signers, no shared anything. Everything from the light switch to the mailbox belonged to me. I disappeared. Not in the dramatic sense, not in the fake my own death sense. I mean socially, emotionally, digitally. I deactivated my social media accounts, stopped attending the same church where whispers followed me like perfume. I let people wonder where I went, let them guess whether I'd lost it or moved on. I moved all right, 2 states away, a quiet town in northern New Mexico, far from the chaos, far from the memories, far from anyone who would ever introduce me as James Carter's ex-wife. Out here, people know me as Miss Foster, the woman who volunteers at the animal shelter, who bakes too much banana bread, who plants marigolds, and who sings old gospel songs on her porch. No one here knows that I once cried myself to sleep in a house that was legally mine, but emotionally stolen. No one knows that my silence once fed someone else's ego, and I like it that way. Every now and then, I get emails from old acquaintances. People who used to pity me now suddenly want to check in. Sometimes it's women going through something similar, asking if I have advice. Sometimes it's gossip disguised as concern. And once it was James Carter. He wrote me a short email like,